Good day everyone, this is Nemesis, and today, by popular demand, I'm going to be redefining the glass cannon necromancer since the game has been recently modified.
Looks like I've got their attention. Now to smash in some flaming heads. For Blood Legion!
Since I will be remaking this guide, I thought I will take it to a whole nother level in terms of the presentation. So this time it's going to be far more structured. We are going to take a look at a build overview, then the weapons, traits, utilities, gear and stats, build rotation and playstyle, math and statistics behind the build, a demonstration of the overall build's effectiveness, and some final notes. Feel free to come back to this table of content in the beginning and choose a different area of interest at any time during the video. Before the build overview, there are two principles of build creation that I go by. Never invest in anything you don't use, and never choose to gain an advantage for yourself at the cost of your team's disadvantage. So the build overview. Ever since I made my first necromancer guide on YouTube, I think I got so far at least 1,000 or maybe 2,000 questions. The most common questions are: what is the best build out of all of them? What do you normally use? And can I use this build in fractals? I kept saying that there is no best damage build, only best at. So this is a glass cannon build. By default it's going to be squishy and have the highest single target DPS that a necromancer can provide. At the same time, the only support it provides is the fact that it acts as a debuffer by adding vulnerability. So on screen I will display the actual overview of how the build fares against the other builds. So as you can see, this build can be used in any and all locations that do not require a high amount of AoE damage, high support or high survivability. Therefore, I would not recommend this build for high level fractals, even though it can perform really well. The only reason I don't recommend this build for high level fractals is for the fact that it does not provide sustained AoE damage, and at the same time it does not provide any support for your team. Moving on to the weapons. As I always say, when you build something from the ground up, you need to understand why. So since this is a glass cannon build, a power type build, it will use weapons that have skills that do direct damage and do not have skills on them that do an X amount of damage over a period of time, which is a condition type weapon, which will be not useful in our build. So we have the axe, vulnerability plus damage, channeling damage and life force, retaliation, which is reflection of incoming damage as power type damage, also cripple, which is a condition that does not do damage but instead reduces the movement speed of the enemies so you can kite them better. Also this skill, as you can see, provides damage and is also an AoE. For your offhand weapon, you should take something that further amplifies the effectiveness of your main hand weapon. So vulnerability, we need to find a weapon that also applies vulnerability. That would be the focus. It applies vulnerability and regeneration for you as well as damage. It bounces to 5 targets and adds further life force. Spinal shiver, it does damage, it chills, which goes really well with the fact that you can cripple, so more kiting capabilities, and it removes 3 boons. At the same time, Unholy Fist removes a boon as well. So we already see we have kiting capabilities, direct damage, vulnerability which directly amplifies the direct damage that you do, and the ability to remove boons. So we are a debuffer, we have the ability to kite, and we do direct damage. For your offset weapon, let's take a look at what else we can use. We have the dagger. Slash your foe twice. This actually is part of a combo. As you can see, slash your foe twice, strike your foe again, strike your foe and gain life force. So further gain of life force. Keep that in mind, we will use it later. Siphon health from your foe. This is a direct damage channeling spell which also heals us. This is immobilize plus damage, therefore even more kiting capabilities which go well with the cripple and the chill for maximum kiting capabilities. And the second weapon from your second set should be the Warhorn. Why the Warhorn? The dagger is a melee range weapon. In order to reach melee range you need to be very mobile. Therefore we have Locust Swarm, which does damage and gives us even more life force in an AoE, gives us swiftness and gives the enemies cripple. Therefore you are really fast, you can get to your target really quickly, and if you need to leave you can leave just as fast and the enemy cannot follow because it is crippled. And also of course the Veil of Doom, which gives the enemy daze. So if you're reaching the enemy might use a high power skill that might make you think twice about hitting it, but with daze that can be easily countered, and it's also unblockable, so keep that in mind. So these were the weapons. Moving on to the traits. So we know we are going to be a glass cannon, we are going to do direct damage, and for direct damage you need power, critical strike chance and critical strike damage. The critical strike chance is the equivalent to precision. So the fact that we have power in the spite trait line teamed up with condition duration, this means the condition duration here in a power build helps you stack the vulnerability on the target and makes the vulnerability stay on the target long enough for you to benefit from it. This is also the sole reason from a power perspective why hybrid builds are viable. So we have power. This means we have to go into the spite trait line and we take a look at the traits. Parasitic Bond. Gain health whenever you kill something. This effect can only trigger every 5 seconds. As a power build you do very high amount of single target DPS and the fight is not going to last long. Therefore you don't need to be really tanky, but at the end of the fight might take its toll on you. So the fact that you heal a little bit every time you kill something keeps you going from one monster to the next. Life Blast grants might for 15 seconds. Life Blast is the hit from Death Shroud 1, and as you can see it does a very high amount of damage if you're in close proximity, or less damage if you're at 1200 range. Each hit that you do with Life Blast will give you might, and might directly amplifies your power. Therefore every consecutive hit you do will be stronger and stronger. This is a very good minor trait. 5% of power is given as bonus healing. The fact that you will have such a high amount of power means that you cannot really invest in anything else, but this minor trait really makes your glass cannon build a bit more sustainable. So 5% of power is given as bonus healing. That means you can actually heal a bit. Axe damage is increased and axe skill recharge 20% faster. You will be using an axe. That means that if you increase its damage and also make the high damage skill recharge faster, that will increase your overall DPS. So it's a really good trait to have. Gain might when hit under 25% health. As a glass cannon you might get to 25% health quite easily. It's not recommended, but you get something for the troubles of being at 25% health, so you can actually kill your target even faster and benefit from healing when the fight is done. From Parasitic Bond. Increases the damage by 20% to enemies below 50% health. So as you can see, your damage can grow exponentially. From Vulnerability, which you apply on the target, the fact that the vulnerability stays on the target, you have power, which makes your hits really strong, and the fact that you do more damage with axe training and even more damage with close to death, and it's percentage wise, so everything you do gets amplified by about 35%. So really good trait. And the fact that before the patch X training was not available as a master trait, it was available as a grandmaster trait, you could not have close to death and X training at the same time. Now you can, and they actually stack. So this is our spite trait line. Moving on, we have curses, precision and condition damage. Precision is the equivalent to critical strike chance, and we know we need critical strike chance in a power type build. But remember the principles of build creations. You do not take anything in a build that you don't use, and you don't choose to have an advantage over your team's disadvantage. So if we go into curses, we break both those rules. Not only we will have condition damage, which we never use because we don't have any weapons that have skills which do an X amount of damage over a period of time, which means this condition damage is wasted. We have the precision, so we can crit higher, but at the same time the first minor trait, critical hits have 66% chance to cause bleeding. Therefore you will be applying bleeding a lot, which means it will occupy bleeding slot on the target mob, and every other bleeder that is designed and built to cause bleeding damage will have its overall effectiveness lower. On top of that, a lot of, if not all, curse traits are designed to amplify hybrid or condition type builds. Therefore going into curses is a big mistake. I always said that even before this patch it was a huge mistake, but a lot of people would not listen. So be wise and heed my warning. We move on to soul rip, critical strike damage and life force pool. You already saw from the weapons that we have life force generation, life force generation, life force generation, life force generation. So everything from the weapons, everything tells us that we have something to do with life force. And we also have critical strike damage, so both of these passive effects we will be using. Glutton, increase life force gain from skills by 10%. Exactly what I'm saying, even more life force generation. Life force drains 25% slower while in Death Shroud. So we stay in Death Shroud for a much longer period of time, and this is important because we will be using this later. Gain spectral armor at 50% health. 60-second cooldown. Spectral armor is this. Even more life force generation and protection that reduces 33% incoming damage. So we know we are squishy, and the fact that we have this while going on 50% health means that it keeps us in the fight, and this is really important. Later I will explain why. Life blast pierces and causes vulnerability. This trait goes really well with Reaper's Smite. Life blast grants might for 15 seconds. So not only every time you use life blast you do more and more damage because you gain might, you do even more and more damage because it causes the vulnerability. So you become empowered and the monster becomes weaker. At the same time this pierces, so no matter what DPS you had on one target, if you put yourself in the right position you can actually hit 2 targets or 3 targets and your damage grows exponentially. You do 5% more damage if you have more than 50% life force. The fact we can gain life force so quickly makes this trait quite useful. You have 50% greater critical strike chance while in Death Shroud. So we did now go into curses to gain our precision, but this trait really makes up for it. Really makes up for it. This is a new trait added in the recent changes and benefits my glass cannon playstyle immensely. Even before the glass cannon was really strong, but now it's amazing. So we have 10 points left. Where should we don't need any vitality or any healing. We don't go into precision and condition damage. We go into toughness and boon duration. Toughness is always useful. Boon duration. We will use the boon duration a bit later. Summon a jagged horror when you kill your foe, something to increase your DPS by a bit and also sometimes take some aggro off of you. and gain 400 toughness while channeling. We have channeling and channeling. We will be channeling a lot, and once we reach the playstyle and rotation, you will see that we actually either channel at all times or use Death Shroud 1 at all times, and it will make perfect sense. Okay, utilities. Since the recent patch, the Spectral Wall no longer applies vulnerability on the target, and with all the other modifications, the build is no longer such a primary debuffer, but has its damage increase. So you no longer use Spectral Wall and Spectral Grasp. It was sluggish and hard to manage, but it was what the build was supposed to do back then. So we need to take something else. Well of Suffering. Target area pulses damaging foes and inflicting vulnerability is an amazing AoE skill. Well of Suffering alongside Life Transfer is the AoE burst that the glass cannon has, and also applies vulnerability on the target. So it's an amazing skill. Never go anywhere without Well of Suffering in a glass cannon build. So what else can we use? We don't have any more skills that apply vulnerability to further increase the effectiveness of our desired playstyle. The minions aren't really as useful because we don't have any minion related traits. We have a lot of condition related utilities, and what will be left is Bloody's Power and Signet of Spite. Before the patch I highly advised against it, especially since a lot of people would go into the cursed straight line and use Bloody's Power, and you would take at least 10 bleed slots away from your team, which heavily decreases the team's overall effectiveness. But since we don't go into curses, and now no one will ever go into curses, and the fact that a Conditionmancer or any bleeding class can stack up to 23-24 bleeding stacks on their own, means that if you steal 2 bleeding stacks from the team, the overall effectiveness does not drop by much. So Bloody's Power is now permitted. It's not ideal, but it now has become the best choice for the glass cannon build. Also, Signet of Spite increases the power by 162 permanently. So we have power and even more power. We have might and vulnerability. The fact that we have 50% critical strike chance while in Death Shroud means that if we get our critical strike chance from gear to 50%, we will actually have 100% critical strike chance in Death Shroud. So once you reach 50% critical strike chance from the gear, everything else can be invested into something more beneficial. So now we know what we have to do. We need to get our stats to 50% critical strike chance, also invest in power and critical strike damage. Once we reach a critical strike chance of 50%, the rest can be invested gear-wise into something more beneficial. So let's take a look at my stats for a second. I have 55% critical strike chance. So I have achieved the 50% critical strike chance sweet spot that we need to get in order to have 100% critical strike chance while in Death Shroud. So the gear is Berserker across the board. That means power, precision and critical strike damage. As you can see, Berserker accessories, power, precision, critical strike damage, power, precision, critical strike damage. Everything is ascended, and this can be obtained from laurels. The rings can be obtained from fractals, earrings can be obtained from guild missions, and the back piece is obtainable from fractals as well. Okay, so the actual armor, I'm using Berserker. Berserker, 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 Berserker. And if you noticed, I have power and might duration. I have might duration as my runes. 2 runes of Holbrack, 2 runes of strength, and 2 runes of fire. I no longer need precision. My critical strike damage is at 108 at the moment. And I mentioned previously something more beneficial. We know we have that, and that keeps interrupting me. We know we have might from Bloody's power, and each time we attack with Life Blast, because of Reaper's might, we empower ourselves for 15 seconds. We also had boon duration, 10%. So it's starting to add up now. We have 50% critical strike chance, 100% critical strike chance while in Death Shroud. Each time we stay in Death Shroud, we empower ourselves even more and we weaken our enemy. So each time we hit with Life Blast, we had 15-second duration on might. Now because of this gear, which is 20% might, 20% might and 20% might duration, alongside 10% boon duration, that's 70% increased boon duration, and a Life Blast hit will now add, let's take a quick look, 25 seconds of might. 25 seconds of might. So 25 hits off. Life Blast actually reaches you the cap of might stacking. It's not really relevant to reach the cap, and you can never get 25 consecutive hits of life transfer in Death Shroud, but you have a 10 might stack head start. And if you're in a party that you have a few other members that like to stack might as well, a few other party members that like to stack might as well, you have 25 stacks of might at all times. Keep in mind that one stack of might is actually 34 power. So 25 stacks of might will give you 875 extra power, and you have access to 875 extra power almost all the time. That will put you at around 5370 something, 76 power, which is insanely good. It's insanely good, trust me on that. Moving on to weapons, we have Berserker Axe, Berserker Focus, Berserker Dagger and Berserker Warhorn. In the axe I use Superior Sigil of Focus. For those of you still keeping track, we have 20% extra damage, 10% from axe training, which is 30, 35 plus 25% from 25 stacks of vulnerability, that equals 60%, and the Superior Sigil of Force actually puts you at 65% extra damage. On the Focus I use Superior Sigil of Perception, that stacked 25 times gives you 250 more precision. The 250 more precision is required to actually reach these 50% critical strike chance, over 50% critical strike chance. As you can see, I'm only at 42 critical strike chance from gear, but if you stack the sigil, it's something different entirely. Berserker Dagger with Superior Sigil of Ray. Dagger auto attack attacks very fast, and since you have critical strike chance and critical strike damage as much as you need, might as well get something that will make you attack even faster, since you will be critting quite often, and of course Superior Sigil of Force, so you keep the overall increase of damage. On top of that, there is still more you can do. You see, I have 54% critical strike chance, and we know that at level 80, 21 precision equals 1 critical strike chance. So we have more critical strike chance than we actually need. That is because I'm using Bowls of Butternut Squash Soup, which gives 80 precision, 8 critical strike damage. So I am at 108, and we know the maximum critical strike damage that can be obtained is around 117, I think 117, 120 critical strike damage can be obtained. So I'm not missing that much, and instead of this, in some locations that have a lot of mobs, and I do mean a lot of mobs, we can actually use 80% chance to gain might when you kill a foe and 4% critical strike damage. Feel free to use the more improved version of both of these foods, since they will give you, I think, 100% chance to get might when you kill a foe and 6% critical strike damage. Also, this will go up to 10% critical strike damage and 100 precision. I use this because this actually guarantees that you have permanent 25 stacks of might at all times when fighting AoE mobs. So that will put you at a severe advantage over everything. And as you can see, I'm still over 51% critical strike chance. Last thing you can do is never forget to bring potion. You may use this build in different dungeons and always have a potion with you that gives 10% more damage versus something. So for those of you still keeping track, now we are at 75% increase damage. We do 75% more damage. And we have 100% critical strike chance while we are in Death Shroud. We also have 3401 attack plus 875 attack from might, up to 4300 and something. We have 1936 armor, which gets amplified when you're channeling, gets amplified by another 400 when channeling, and 18,000 and a half health, 19,000 with the wall v wall bonuses, doesn't matter. Also we have boon duration, 104 critical strike damage, and life force pool that is 30% bigger. So now you can see how all of these stacked up into something really beautiful. The final stats are amazing, such high power, 50% critical strike chance and sometimes 100% critical strike chance, over 100% critical strike damage, and 75 up to 75 overall more damage. Okay, moving on to the rotation. The DPS rotation is divided into two segments. The first segment would be for single target, the second segment would be for AoE. For AoE it's quite simple, but for single target there's a principle you have to follow. It's basically in two stages. The first stage is to power up your Death Shroud. While in Death Shroud and you use Death Shroud 1, you basically empower yourself and at the same time make your opponent vulnerable, which basically increases your damage further. So for single target it would be something like this. You start with vulnerability and you use ghostly claws. So as you can see, my life force pool is slowly growing. You may be a bit more complex than that for single target and use Bloody's power, then apply the vulnerability, then use ghostly claws, and you can see my damage is much higher. Sometimes you are on cooldown, as you can see. This is on cooldown, this might be on cooldown, you need to move on to the next mob. Going to Death Shroud 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, and as you can see, my damage grows so much when you're hitting a target under 50% health. Also, Death Shroud, Reaper Touch and Ghostly Claws might be on cooldown at times. So you move on to the dagger, you go fast to a mob, make him not attack, and you do some hits with the dagger. Maybe you want to escape, immobilize, life transfer from afar, and go back in for the kill. These mobs die too fast, so it's not really going to showcase me what I really need to do, but the principle is simple. While you are not in Death Shroud, you need to stack vulnerability and stack might on yourself. Then you go into Death Shroud and stack more vulnerability on the target and more might on yourself. Then you come back from Death Shroud and use Ghostly Claws again. I will find the giant soon enough and I will test it on them. One more time now. So there is no exact rotation, you have to keep in mind, you empower your You fill up your life force to empower yourself for Death Shroud, so you can empower yourself from Death Shroud by stacking might on yourself and vulnerability on the target. So like I said, vulnerability, and you do a bit of nice damage here. Death Shroud, as much as possible. AoE if you have to. Consumed conditions, more vulnerability, more might, and another hit. And you're back in Death Shroud. And as you saw, I'm using Death Shroud to keep me alive. I'm not a very tanky character, I don't have a tanky build, but the fact that life force pool regenerates this fast, the life force is not only used defensively but also offensively, because I can use it to actually kill my target. And of course, so the AoE rotation is quite simple. You basically gather up some mobs, you may choose to empower yourself with Blood is Power, Well of Suffering, going to Death Shroud, and that was all. The fact that when you're in Death Shroud, your Well of Suffering has 100% critical strike chance as well, makes your Well of Suffering plus Life Transfer an amazing AoE bursting combo. It actually makes you burst really hard. So let's just calculate how much it would actually burst. Well of Suffering, 35-second cooldown, and I'm going to stay in Death Shroud. So yeah, around 2k, severely higher if you're fighting mobs under 50% health, but it's around 2k per tick, and it ticks 6 times. It's also unblockable and a combo field. So let's see how much the life transfer hits for. An average of 5k. So basically this does about 10k, and the life transfer does about 5k. So 15k damage on 5 targets, which is amazing, which is actually amazing. The underwater rotation is quite simple. You need to get your life blast hits quite often. So you might start with Deadly Feast and Wicked Spiral to add some vulnerability, but then you immediately need to go into Death Shroud.
Back to dust, my minion.
On top of that, Frozen Abyss does an insane amount of direct damage, also applies vulnerability. So basically you will have to work with Feast, which applies weakness and lets you get close, also gives you life force. Frozen Abyss for vulnerability and direct damage. Direct damage, more vulnerability, movement speed, and from Life Blast from Death Shroud. So let's see, we go in fast, we drag the mob, and mob is gone. Then we find another mob. This is actually a really strong AoE hit. We empower ourselves and then we 8k. Death Shroud and 2 hits. Mind you, Life Blast hits twice as fast underwater, so actually you do hit quite fast, and the might stacking is insane with this underwater ability. The might stacking is actually very impressive. So now we move on to the math and science behind the build. This is a quite complicated part meant for the more advanced users. So you've seen sort of the principle and the rotation. You basically empower your Death Shroud so it can empower the rest of your attacks, and you're either channeling or in Death Shroud, and while you're channeling you're more tough, and while you are in Death Shroud, your Death Shroud will absorb some of the hits. So you always have a chance to do DPS. This means DPS uptime. And we know we need power, critical strike chance and critical strike damage to do damage in a power build. Also vulnerability increases your damage. But there is a more complicated side to doing damage. You need to take into consideration the DPS uptime, the cast time of the skill you are using, and its cooldown. So what do you mean by that? Well, this has a 6-second cooldown and a 2-second cast time. That means that this huge amount of damage that you are seeing on the screen, 2700 and something, is actually only 1300 stat wise over 1 second, because it has a 2-second channeling and also 6-second cooldown, which means this skill does the amount of damage displayed on screen, which is actually in reality up to 10k as you've seen, but has an 8-second interval in which it does the damage, 2-second channeling and then the 6-second cooldown after that. So in the 6-second cooldown you need to do something else, otherwise your DPS will drop dramatically. So by going into Death Shroud and using Life Blast, which is a 1 second cast skill, you do damage on top of your Ghostly Claws and you don't wait for it to recharge. Every second counts. And if you take a look at Dagger 1, as you can see, stat wise it does a bit more damage because it's 800, 660 and 1100. And also the fact that it is a very fast skill, so all of these combined should attack in 1 second. And if you remember, this has a 2-second channeling duration and this combined is 1 second, so you have to basically double this. So we have, oh fuck, I got mine. So we have 2k times 2, that's 4k, which is much higher than what the Ghostly Claws hit. But the fact in DPS uptime, you have to take into consideration how much time you can spend doing that, because if you cannot be in melee range and you have to go in range, basically that time is wasted. So at range you go into Life Blast, which does 1241 every 1 second. Double that, it's a bit higher. It should be a bit higher than Ghostly Claws. It's not, because the tooltip doesn't take into consideration the fact that you have 100% critical strike chance while in Death Shroud. So Life Blast will be your highest range attack, but it's not about which has the highest damage. This build is created in such a way that while you stay in Death Shroud, you empower your Ghostly Claws and you add vulnerability. When you can no longer stay in Death Shroud, you basically apply even more vulnerability, apply even more might, you empower your Death Shroud back and you go back into Death Shroud to further increase the effectiveness of your desired playstyle. So let's see the speeds of these hits. So we have Ghostly Claws, Death Shroud 1. Let's see how many hits you can do until your life force is done, and also how does it compare to some other hits. Keep in mind this is an object and the damage might not be relevant. Actually it's not, because it's a bit weird, you'll see. So Death Shroud 1 starting in 3, 2, 1, now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21 and 22. So I'm kind of screwing with your head right about now, aren't I? Well, the thing is, when I did the test with Ghostly Claws, as you've seen, the activation time was correct, and the activation time is correct for Life Blast as well. The thing is, very few people know that there's a delay between activation times. The only way to correctly monitor DPS is by actually having a certain benchmark to test against, to balance things against at all times, because on second doesn't really work. So you have 22 hits that are done in 33 seconds, and it empties your life force pool. So let's see how many cycles of Dagger 1 attacks we can do in 33 seconds. 1 cycle, 2 cycles, 3 cycles, 4 cycles, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. So as you can see, the Dagger 1 spam has a higher damage output by about 20%, but you have to keep in mind the DPS uptime every second you spend. Now doing DPS, it's problematic. So let's take a look at what Leech Form can do. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 25. So I will display the final benchmark results on the screen, and as you can see, we have a winner. So Leech Form does the most damage. After that is Dagger 1 spam, but you have to remember that Dagger 1 doesn't give you enough DPS uptime because you cannot always be in melee. And the most DPS uptime you get from Death Shroud 1. So this is actually really beautiful, because Death Shroud 1 also empowers both your Leech Form and your Dagger 1. So finally the build is really balanced in every aspect of it. Also, the reason that Leech Form now does more damage than Dagger 1 is because Leech Form actually got a bit of buff. Now Leech Form benefits from the weapon stats even in Leech Form, even as the transformation occurs, and also the Deathly Claws have an increased activation time. So now the attacks are a bit faster. So remember that. So the final thing I will say is, you've seen me hit 5 to 7k instantly, and as you can see on the screen, it is like double or a bit more than what a condition build can do, and at the same time the condition can reach 3500 but not instantly, so it's a lot more. But at the same time the AoE capabilities is limited to like 100,000 damage over a 40-second period of time, and if we just multiply 3500 single target DPS times 5 target, that's about 17,500, and that is like per second. So multiply that with 40 seconds and it's 700,000 damage, I believe. Yeah, I know, granted you don't have 25 stacks of bleeding on the target, on 5 targets at all times, bleeding keep dropping and stuff, but I didn't put burning, torment, poison and damages from other sources, so it might not be 700,000, but it will be about 400,000, so that's 4 times the AoE capabilities of a glass cannon build, even though the burst of the glass cannon is far stronger. Anyway, I leave you now with a bit of demonstration of the overall build, just to prove what it means to have DPS uptime in places that you simply don't have DPS uptime in general. After that some notes and I'm done. So talking about DPS uptime and places you don't really have DPS uptime a lot of the time. Going melee against this boss is not recommended, to be honest, because he mostly one-shots glass cannon meleers. And as you can see, I'm doing quite a nice amount of damage, and also I have DPS uptime, which is really important. Every second that a meleer spends not being able to attack and not alive to attack is lost DPS. Also about the capabilities of stacking 25 stacks of might. As you can see, I have 25 stacks of might on me, and trust me when I say this, I did not get buffed by my team. So it's not that hard to play. As you can see, I'm playing with my screen open and I'm still doing quite okay. And let's try to go in melee a little bit, see what happens. To get some DPS uptime in melee, but it's not really pleasant, as you can very well see. Bad idea. Bad idea. Okay, moving on to range again and keeping up with the DPS uptime at all times. Switch, ghostly claws, and even underwater you can keep 25 stacks of might on you and do very nice amount of DPS at all times. There we go. Nice DPS uptime. Nice might stacking. So some final notes. Maybe you do not favor the might stacking playstyle, then feel free to play with Superior Rune of Eagle, which does 5% more damage to targets than 50% health, and you also add a lot of precision and critical strike damage. You don't need the extra precision, but maybe you would like to play with Dagger 1 more than you like to be at range. But keep in mind what I said about DPS uptime and being at range. Alternatively, you can use Superior Rune of the Scholar, which doesn't give you precision, gives you power instead, critical strike damage and 10% damage above 90% health. This will theoretically give you a really the highest raw boost, since it adds more power than it does for me, and you also have the critical strike damage, which will put you around, it will give you another 8, which will put you at 106 critical strike damage, as well as the 10% more damage while above 90% health. This is highly unlikely to happen. It's not going to happen that often, and the fact that with this build, as you can see, you can get up to 25 stacks of might permanently. 25 stacks of might permanently is about 4200 power, which is a lot more than the 10% damage while above 90% health, which is not going to happen that often anyway. Or you might even go just for ruby orbs if you're not rich. It's not a problem, and you can get power, critical strike damage and precision. It's not ideal. Ruby orb is like the last thing you want to do, but if you're not rich and it's a different playstyle you may opt for. Also the utilities, Well of Suffering and Signet of Spite. Instead of Signet of Spite you might take Spectral Walk. If you have to move really fast you might and teleport, you might go for Signet of the Locust. If you want to free roam you might use Spectral Wall if there's a place where mobs kind of overrun you. You might even use Well of Darkness to provide a bit of support, Well of Power if need be. The point is adapt and overcome. That's the thing. This build is like your anchor. The fact that this build is correctly made and respects all the principle of the glass cannon, also has insane capabilities because it is correctly made, makes this your anchor. You can go from here, and if you got to this part in the video, you're pretty skilled as a player. You're already pretty good as a player, since you now have all the information and all the tools required to play effectively a glass cannon necromancer. Okay, I've done it, and this is the I didn't knew what I was getting myself into, and I started on this path, and I thought to myself, I'm going to do this guide like the best guide possible, best guide ever created. So much work, but I have done it. It's finished. Feel free to comment, rate, share, subscribe, and show other people what a crazy I am. Yeah, this is Facebook page, Twitch. On Facebook I will be freely promoting visual and audio artists. Speaking of visual artists, if you know any really talented visual artist or graphic designer that is willing to collaborate for a long time project, don't hesitate to message me. On Twitch I will be live streaming starting soon. First I need a break, and I have more tutorials to do in the near future. If you have any questions, or if you want to see some of my other guides, there will be annotations all over the place. Also, you can leave a question in the comment section below and I will get to you eventually. Don't forget to check out my suggestions section on this channel. This is the last time I do something so complicated. But anyway, until next time, enjoy your gaming and have a great day.